and recording.
Connecting. We are good to go. We are now live.
Hi, welcome to Spouse Nation. We are a program of Military Spouse Jobs, which is a unique nonprofit organization that assists military spouses, dependents, and caregivers with job placement and career progression. Spouse Nation is a program that helps keep spouses employment ready until they're ready for employment, and we all know we need that. My name is Stacy Harris, and I am the Outreach Program Manager for Military Spouse Jobs and Spouse Nation. With me today is my partner, Melinda Rao, who is our Senior Outreach Specialist. And we are excited to have two special guests with us today, and they're going to share one of the programs from One-to-One Women Coaching Women. We have Katie, and she is a certified leadership and life coach with over 25 years of experience and the founder of Modern Pilgrim. And also with us today, who we've had the opportunity to interview a few weeks ago, is Carrie Fisher, and she is a board member of One-to-One and a previous client as well. So she's here to help with the second half of the presentation. So today, one of their programs, and I love the title, it's the Power Hour, is the name of the program, and the title today is Get Out of Your Head and Into Your Action Tree. And we are going to be given 5 simple steps to get into energized action. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Melinda to kick us off for the program and give us some tips so we can take care of all that we need to do for our housekeeping. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I just want to give a few housekeeping tips for our platform today for those that are new to AirMeets. Across the moderation box on the right-hand side of your screen, you'll see a few little words. One says chats, then you'll see Q&A, which stands for questions and answers, then polls and raise hands and videos. We'll only be using a couple of those housekeeping pieces, chats, Q&As, and raise hands. Throughout the presentation today, Katie will be engaging with those that are here with us live, and she'll be asking for some input from you guys. This is supposed to be an engaging presentation today, so we're asking for some input from you guys today. So if you would like to participate, you can raise your hand, and those of us that are behind the scene will engage with you and click the button. And if you would like to come on live, I will click on your name and bring you onto the stage. Or if you would just like to ask a question in the chat box, we will bring that information to Katie so that she can answer your question in the process of the presentation. Now we're going to turn this over to Katie, and we're going to back off into the background so that she can share this amazing Power Hour with you. So we're going to hand it over to you, Katie.
Thank you, Melinda and Stacy, and welcome everyone. I'm really excited to be here with this Spouse Nation audience. As you saw, I was having a little technical difficulties here. Hopefully that won't continue. But, I really want to just lay the groundwork for a really good webinar today. So I will start with 3 quick notes. Number 1 is I am aware I tend to speak fast. I'm trying really hard to slow down, but if I start ramping up again, don't hesitate to mention in the chat box. Melinda and Stacy will slow me down. Number 2 is about any question you have as we go. There'll be a couple of moments along the way that I will specifically stop to ask for questions if you have them, but feel free to drop them in the Q&A box as we go. And therefore, whenever we take a break, Melinda or Stacy will jump in and share them, but also you can do them in real time as well. But don't save them up till the end. You might forget. And then number 3, I'm going to have a few questions for you, as Melinda mentioned. And I think we'll just use the chat box for those. So to keep the Q&A box clear for questions, chat box for any responses that you have to my questions, if that makes sense. So we're going to start by, I see a few of you have already done it, but we'd love to know where you're from, where you are right now, actually. And so just drop it in the chat box, the city, state, country. It could be the state of mind you're in, whatever you feel like sharing, just so we know a little bit about who is out there. And as you're doing that, I will start and tell you I'm Katie Albert Bolton. And I currently live in Lambertville, New Jersey, which is a really beautiful, people are surprised to hear New Jersey has beauty, but it really is a gorgeous piece of the state that's right in the middle and all the way west, kind of almost just in Pennsylvania. And it's very rural. It's really beautiful. We have pigs across the street. So, and I think that instead of telling you about all the many jobs I've had, because I really identify with those of you who've moved a lot, I've moved a lot of choices were sort of made for me when we moved. And a lot of unexpected life changes happened. But I'm going to start really by telling you about the second to last move I made before coming to Lambertville. It was when I moved from Boston to New York City, very kind of inadvertently and unexpectedly. Rent stabilized apartment became available, so I had to move, of course. And when I landed on my feet and kind of volunteered my way into a full-time job at the Tribeca Film Festival, I, a couple years in, found myself helping produce the world premiere of Mission Impossible 3, which was a giant project, as you can imagine, probably bigger than it sounds even. It involved Tom Cruise, obviously, navigating New York City by motorboat, by motorcycle, by fire engine, by motorcade, and involved getting approvals from, of course, the studio, New York City, the Church of Scientology, and numerous sponsors for every single decision that involved Tom Cruise. There were helicopters, and there were screenings in 3 boroughs, and about 100 million fans everywhere he went. And it was really big. And I say all of this to illustrate that this tool we're going to learn today will work for a project that big. It also works for projects much smaller, but it really will work to get into action, to get clear on something that feels really big. So but it is bite-sized, it's small, and we're going to learn it, and we're going to hear it a few different ways during this hour. So we're going to start by just talking about, thinking about, I want each of you to sort of think along with me as I'm talking you through one example of this. And before we get into it, I really want to give you a little bit of background on coaching, because that's really the background for these projects, for this tool, really. As you may have heard, I think you heard at the beginning, I'm a coach. I'm also on the board of One-to-One. And as coaches, we really, we kind of really focus in on 2 key questions. Who are you? Who's the client? Who are you? Who are you really? And what do you really want? And this always brings to mind one of my favorite Yogi Berra quotes. There are so many, but I think it's something like, if you don't know where you're going, you'll end up someplace instead. And I know that sounds, the easiest way to imagine it is as a baseball player, if he didn't know that he had to hit a ball, and then run around the infield, have your foot touch all 3 bases before crossing the home plate, you might just run straight out to right field. Like, it sounds silly, but it's true. There are rules. And in baseball, there are very strict rules. But in life, we don't really have those rules. It's not always clear where to go, what to do next. And when things are, when you're in between jobs, when you're in between homes, when you're moving and migrating, and things sort of feel like they've thrown up, it's like your life is a little game of pickup sticks. It can feel daunting. And so this tool is designed to help you get out of that stage of overwhelm, and to help you, if you have an idea, you might want to write a book, you might want to make a garden in your back. This works for all of it. So, and it's really, at its heart, what I really believe is this is a creative act. It's an act of creation. So there's no right answers. There's no wrong answers. It's just what's right for you. And each one of you have your own life experiences, your own strengths, your own challenges, your own values, your own insecurities, and your own untapped dreams and aspirations. And so that's what, again, in coaching, we're always just trying to get to the core of that. And this tool is going to help you do that. So what are we going to learn today? First, we're going to learn the core elements of an action planning tree, which are repeatable. It's like rinse and repeat throughout your life. Anything comes your way, you can use it. We're going to learn how to shift from feeling overwhelmed or underwhelmed or stuck or just dealing with never-ending growing lists into taking action and being really clear about what the next action is that you want to take. And then lastly, we're going to learn the number one most reliable way to keep yourself on track, moving forward, and feeling good, even when you're sort of temporarily stalled out. You can always just revisit this tool. It gets you back on track. And, you know, in a volatile and unpredictable world such as ours, and if ever we've learned that, it's the last couple of years, I really believe we will thrive professionally and personally by unlocking the power of staying connected to the meaningful, self-directed life you want. And so again, this is a way to do it. So I'm going to ask you all a question. I'd love for you to weigh in. This is a place, let's drop it in your answers in the chat box. Where do you struggle most when starting a new project, when thinking about a goal or a dream or an idea that you have? Is it getting started? Is it starting? I know a lot of people who just kind of get really stuck and procrastinate. I know one person right here. And then I know people who are really fast starters and sometimes feel like they kind of struggle with the ending. They get kind of lost along the way, or they feel they lose confidence, or they lose focus. And then there's sort of every variation in between. But I'm curious to know if any of you can share, where you feel you might have struggled the most. Is it getting started? Is it finishing? And, drop those in the chat box if you feel like it. Okay, I see some people answering. Thank you. Some people say moving beyond the dream phase into action. I hear you on that. Seeing things into fruition, finishing. I remember I had a client once who was saying, I start all these things, I never finish. And I was like, hey, you're a great starter. That's so amazing. And really part of the tool we'll get there is about saying, okay, who will help me finish? How do I keep myself from getting to that stage again? Is checking in and asking yourself that question at the beginning so that you're sort of teeing yourself up to not fall back into that same habit. All right, so then thank you everybody for keep them coming and keep dropping them in the chat box. Okay, so before we begin, we're gonna bring up in a moment the tool. And just before you look at it, I'd love for each of you to kind of get clear on one idea, one dream that you have that you want to kind of use to walk alongside of us while we're doing this today. It could be something that you feel sort of stuck on, that you've been overwhelmed by, or you're procrastinating, that you're dreading, or that you're just sort of so excited by and you're afraid to see it kind of not come out the way you want it. Or maybe something brand new that you haven't even started, just like an idea that just struck you. Doesn't matter. Anything works, and all dreams are welcome, and size doesn't matter. Okay. And I'm going to say one thing. I realize what I'm doing. I always do this, which is when I received my training, I remember learning that there were brain scan studies that involved brain scans that revealed that when people heard the word or said the word goal, it affected their amygdala. What lit up in these scans was their amygdala, which many of you might know is the fight, flight, freeze, or appease zone of the brain. And on the other hand, when they heard or said the word aspirations instead of goals, it went to their prefrontal cortex, which is where people do all of their problem solving and deep thinking. So you'll hear me dancing around these words. I use goals sometimes because it's the most familiar to people. But I often try to say other words to make you not get into that fight, flight, freeze, or appease zone. So I'm going to say aspirations. I'm going to say dreams. I'm going to say, experiences you want to feel. All of this is sort of, you choose your own adventure on this. But I just sort of encourage you to think about that when we're done with this hour. When you're saying goals, is it triggering you? Is it making you freeze? Is it making you procrastinate? Does aspiration get you to a different place? It's hard to say aspiration setting. So goal setting kind of stays in the coach lexicon, but just wanted to mention that. So as we get into it, I know that starting new things is really challenging. It's hard for me too. I have these tools, but I still will often procrastinate. And when I get a new project, I'll sort of get excited, but then also get a little paralyzed. And I will tell you, I recently used this to design an artist residency, to draft a strategic planning retreat with a board that was a client. It really does work. So I just want to encourage you, whatever that idea is, I hope you're using this time as I speak to hone in on one idea. And now we're gonna, Melinda, if you'll bring up the image, the first image, which is the blank slate, the tree, without all the, without anybody's work on it. And once we see that, you'll see the, just to let you know what's on the screen, you will be receiving a handout sent to you, I think, by email after we're done here. So you'll have a version of this, which is really just something you can print out like 800 times and use it all the time and use it to map out different ideas. It'll look roughly like this. So thank you, Melinda. So what we're looking at here is a tree. Now, this is something I created after just sketching something out. Every time I did the tree, I would just get a blank piece of paper. So that works. If you have paper in front of you, I encourage you to jot some ideas along that come up for you as I walk you through this. So let's start with the trunk. The trunk is very clearly that sort of energizing end result you want to experience, the goal. So is it a job change? Is it a book you want to write? Is it a closet you want to turn into an office? Is it learning to play golf? Whatever, you get the point. So you've got your goal, that's the trunk. And then the one thing I'm going to add to it is when I do this work with clients, I kind of press them a little further generally to get it into a positively stated thing. So instead of saying, I want to get rid of my debt, right? That immediately makes my chest clench and I feel stress. It would be, I want to get myself to live financially free and clear. It feels sort of different, right? So instead of saying, I want to get rid of my fear of public speaking, which I have a little bit of, it would be to say something like, feel really comfortable and prepared public speaking. So just think about that as you write down your trunk. Can you add something to it that really kind of energizes you? That's when we say what we mean when we say energizing goal. It's that it makes you feel energized. It makes you feel positive. It makes you lean into it and feel excited about it, even when it's hard. Maybe it's because you see how you'll feel when it's done. It might take you to get to do that. I mean, doing our taxes isn't exciting, but we need to do it. We need to and then if you see yourself at the end, it can really help you get to that energizing feeling. Okay, so now we're going to kind of go through this more quickly. The main limbs, those are the big, the 3 to 5 main areas of focus that you're going to have. Some people call them action items. I tend to call them action categories because I kind of see them as like silos of things that are all related to each other. And then your branches are the detailed steps of those major silos, those major action areas. And then the smaller branches are the detailed steps, and then the leaves, I guess that's where we are. The leaves are more where you're getting into that to-do list. That's where it starts to look like a bunch of small things that kind of help fill in and add color and dimension and detail to the actions that you have set out for yourself. And this will all become a little bit clearer as we see a real life example, which we'll do next. But it's like those touch points, those just finite tasks that aren't super interconnected with something else. And then the roots, probably my favorite part to talk about, and we're going to get into greater detail later. The roots are the people who are going to support you as you do this, the people who can either take on some of the work or help you with being an accountability partner, who can chip in some piece of it or just kind of high five you along the way, whatever your needs are. And they can be individuals, they can be groups. I encourage you to really think a lot about how you get support. And so what you see here is just that initial sketch of the tree and how it might look at the very beginning. And even by now, if you've been going along and making notes, that's great. It's a really good start. If you haven't, it's fine. We can do that later. But it's really amazing how much you can get in a very short amount of time. So now we're going to look at a real life example that is of a tree a friend of mine used. She is a coach. And so even though we're not supposed to coach our family, when her daughter came to her with the idea of building a deck, she brought out the tree and they sat there, and she says in a very short amount of time, they got the following tree written out. So Melinda, if we'll switch our slides, you'll start to see what a real action planning tree could look like. This doesn't have everything in it because it would be a little hard on the screen, but I'm going to talk you through a little bit of what you're seeing here. So of course, the main trunk is build a deck. If she didn't do this with me, if it was me, it might be build a deck to enjoy life in my backyard with, or something like that. That's a bit of a stretch, but that's fine. But really think about the emotion that's attached to the action. And if you can put it here, just a quick reminder for that. And then as you start to walk through the tree, you'll see that the major limbs were make a detailed plan for the deck, purchase materials to build the deck, construct the deck, purchase furniture for the deck. And then you can look in closer, you can sort of see how initially those would be your 4 key components of creating the deck, of building the deck. And then if you kind of look at, we can take, maybe 1 or 2 of the main limbs and break them down. So let's say determine size and shape of the deck. So underneath making a detailed plan for the deck, what she needed to do was determine the size and shape. Exact dimensions, the length, width, height, that's where you get into detail. She needed to think about, were there going to be railings? Are there going to be built-in planters or built-in benches? Are there going to be steps? Things like that. Because all of that you'll see starts to play itself out further as you go down the project. This is probably pretty obvious. So then maybe making, the next branch was purchase materials to build the deck. So the big limbs are making a list of all materials, comparison shop for wood, hardware, stain finish, arrange for delivery. And then within that, there are some leaves that can be built on. And, it's the hardware needed, the tools that are needed, stains or finishes. You get the picture. So that's a nice concrete example, kind of finite, manageable. We all have something like that at probably a DIY home project. We can kind of see where, oh yeah, that would make me just feel organized, and I can start anywhere I want. I mean, that's the rule of the tree, is like you start anywhere you want. I might look at this and be like, I know I'm going to start with the shopping, right? I'm going to jump right ahead to the deck furniture, not the logical place to start, but that's going to get me excited, and that's going to feel manageable, and it's going to get me to like pull off some leaves. And this is the one place in our lives where we want to be destroying trees. We want to be making this tree smaller eventually. It might get bigger first, because as you go, you'll get more ideas and things that'll get added on to different parts of the tree. But eventually you're going to start seeing it shrink and shrink and shrink. And then she mapped in the people who are going to support her. So she started with her daughter, of course. The daughter was there. The son-in-law, her kids. Maybe she knows Bob Vila. That would be so great. So the idea is just to kind of think about it, but also it might be going to Bob Vila's website, right? That's another way to think about it. And so and then once you do that, that might tell you, oh, I have to add research. Maybe I have to add a major limb, maybe, or that's a branch off of the planning stage. It's sort of up to you. There's no right way. There's no wrong way to do this. So, after you've taken a few minutes, and really that's all it takes. It's amazing how little time, how far you can go in such a small amount of time. I usually ask my clients just to do this in 5 minutes and then get back to me about how it went. They usually in 3 minutes can report that it was incredible. And then in 5 minutes, they were just amazed. So, but after you think that you've really got a good foundation there, I encourage you to check in and ask yourself, what information do you need? Because sometimes you don't remember that, the search for information. Do you need to add research, as I was mentioning, to a branch? Or is there someone you need to speak with? And so maybe it's scheduling a conversation. Maybe you wouldn't have thought of that, but that's the thing that will stop you because you're intimidated. But so I just encourage you to do that check-in, and then you get to decide where you want to start. Like I said, I'll start in the shopping. Somebody else might start with measuring. So, it's up to you. There's no right way. So I'm wondering, if this was you, if this was your tree, where would you start? Just think about that. Where would your spouse start to understand the differences with people's choices, and then understand, how do I, as I'm going through this project, need to communicate with and about this project to the people that I want to bring on board. And I really want to, as I said, we're going to talk about the roots later, just really encourage you not to think you have to go it alone with any of these projects. And just to sort of put a button on this before we bring Carrie forward for her example, I just want to mention that I have seen this done. As I said before, I used to just write this on a piece of paper before I made this worksheet. I've seen people do it with 3x5 cards, making their, they put it on either on a desk or on a wall, depending on, how they want to do it. And then they have on one side those major limbs, and then on the back side, the branches, the leaves, and they can just start crossing things off or check boxes. I'm a big checkbox person. I've seen people do it with Post-its, and then they put it on in the shape of a tree on their wall, and then they just start pulling leaves off and pulling branches off, and it's really invigorating to see it, as I said, to see that tree shrinking. So you can do this any way you want. Some people even don't use the tree model. They use a house model, whatever is your structure, whatever is you can do this in your own image. And as I said, be creative and have fun with it. Okay. So if you didn't get there before, take a minute to think about and write down your goal. What is your goal? What is your end result that you want to feel or experience or create? And write that down. And if you want, maybe even share it in the chat box. It would be great to hear what people are beginning to think about, the projects they want to kind of bring forward. And the timeline I like to think about, I may not have mentioned this, but I don't really work on a 5-year timeline. I think the last 2 years have proven why. But I do think about 90 days. I always work with clients on 90-day schedules, and I think, or 90-day projections. And I think we can start to envision where we want to be in 90 days. We can get pretty far, whether it's a project, even a book, right? A book might take you years, but in 90 days, you can make some real progress. You can develop some really good habits around being consistent and working towards that. You can be doing research. You can be doing all the things. So think about 90 days. Where do you want to be? That's sort of the span I like for this project initially. But of course, you can use it for whatever you want. So if anybody's going to drop their goal in the chat box, we'll read them out. But if not, I'm just going to bring Carrie forward. And if anybody has questions at this point, I'm happy to answer questions. I'm going to check and I don't see any questions. But I'm seeing some goals come in, and I am using the word goals, I'm aware. But so somebody said making more revenue with my business, improved health. Absolutely. These are great ones. I've worked with all of them before. You can get very far in 90 days with all of this. And you can use the tree for them for sure. Okay, so let's see, Carrie, do you want to hop on? Are you out there? There she is.
I'm here.
Hi. Okay, so Carrie, I know, because I know you very well, that you've used this tool many times. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering, is there something that you've used it for recently that we can talk about here?
The most recent really big project I used it on was when my husband was medically retired, and we moved from Wisconsin to Florida, so cross country. And we basically downsized a 2,500 square foot home to a 1,200 square foot home and left all of our family and friends to a place that we didn't know anything about. So my goal was to make this move to Florida really successful and joyful for us.
I love that. And you already did the work. You already stated it as a positive. Exactly. It's not just make a move, right? You want it to feel joyful. You want to embrace it because change is hard. Why make it harder by not finding the joy in it, right? So, okay, great. So so I'm sure because you already did this, do you have what are the kind of main limbs of this?
Yeah, so there's just so much in move. And I know everybody on here probably knows that. We've all done lots of moves. For me, what made it different, we've moved between homes in the same area so we could get a storage unit and stick stuff in there and do that kind of thing. But this was a really big one. So when I was thinking about the limbs that I needed, one was really the packing process. because I had the house, I had the storage unit, and so I had to think about packing everything.
Mhm.
And then another thing, if you're ready for that, the other next
Oh,
thing
yeah.
I had was address changes, because it was more than just having my mail forwarded. I really had to make sure that all of my medical providers knew that. Any
Mhm.
employment issues got changed, and there was a lot more to the address change than just moving to the town next to me.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So why don't we go through, let's keep going through limbs and then we'll double back because I'm interested in that
Sure.
one, but I want to, let's just so that we can give them the full image, the full sort of big vision, 20,000 feet, and then we'll drill down.
A third limb for me was determining what my needs would be at the new location. I wouldn't have family close to me, and just to really think about what were going to be my needs there.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I
And that's
started with those three
hard to
big
imagine
limbs.
sometimes when you're not there yet, right?
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay. And what's next? Any others? Or is that it?
Those were really the big three that I put out there, and then we'll talk about later, but I ended up expanding some of them. So
Okay. Jumping ahead. Okay, so great. So let's talk. As I said, let's talk about the address change. Is that okay with you to start there? Because I can't, having done some moves myself and having one credit card, still technically the address is in a different state from where I live, but I do it electronically. But I know how that can be daunting. It seems like a simple thing, but it actually has a lot of different pieces. So let's walk through what are sort of the key branches off of that. You want to, and then we'll go in real time. Like, tell me one of those branches, and then some of the leads.
Well, one branch was obviously with my current post office, but then what to do with the mail when it got to my new location, because we weren't actually going to be in the house for probably 4 to 6 weeks. We had some temporary housing.
Right.
So the post office was one of the big
Mhm.
ones. And then medical providers, because we were changing between VISNs with the VA. So we had to really make sure everything was set up with all the medical, with the caregiver program between the two different VISNs. And then you mentioned creditors, vendors, utilities.
Mhm.
So I just made each of them a branch because we had different things under each one of them. So I
Right.
just thought of each category, made a branch out of them for the move so that I didn't lose all that.
Right. Right. Exactly. That's how I like to do it too. And I was hearing, if I may, when you mentioned the post office, I'm sort of hearing that there's a couple leads off of that. One is your local, your current, your Wisconsin, and then the next one was Florida, right? So you have different actions for each, but it kind of falls under one category.
Right.
And then, so that's great. I mean, I think that's probably a good illustration for that. There are probably more things like, notifying friends and family and all of that. But I think that we don't need to go that granular right now, maybe. But then I'm wondering, you did mention, I think we had a little sneak peek of this, that as you went, you started to notice, oh, there's something else. And I think I'm kind of beginning to sense it. And I think it kind of speaks to this audience too. But I'm wondering, I'm going to jump ahead. So did you add a branch? It sounds like you said you did, or a limb maybe.
I made a separate limb for income and employment. And that's kind of when I keep coming back and visiting. We've only been here for just under 2 years,
Right.
but I realized it was more than just updating my profiles, for instance, updating my LinkedIn, updating my social media, everything.
Right.
That really there was a lot of research to do. We were in a new area, a new state. So that kind of became its own limb. And
Yeah.
in some ways it's becoming its own tree, to be honest.
Aha, you see, you keep
So,
moving ahead, right? So that's exactly,
yeah.
I started to think about that. I mean, and I didn't mention this earlier, but I often, if something is a bigger project or something where you just go into more granular detail, especially if you're using this handout, it's going to get crowded. It's going to start to feel overwhelming again. So it sounds like you do what I do, which is take off a whole limb and turn it into a new tree. Is that right? Is that what you do?
Sometimes, yeah. And in fact, I really did that with, like just getting to the new location. And we all know this with moves. You get there and it's like, well, the furniture isn't right for the house, or, you needed to line up help for unloading. And so sometimes that just became its own thing once we got relocated too. So it's such a versatile tool that way. And that was great.
Yeah. And how does it feel like when you use this? Just a little bit, like a moment of like how it feels, because it's going to be a little too much in our heads right now. And I think like one of the things is really important to check in with is, how did it feel to get that all out on paper onto the tree or onto a piece of paper or onto Post-its?
So much of it is just such a big thing. It was really overwhelming to me to be moving to a new state. But the one thing I miss really often are the roots of it. And so
Mhm.
when you put this whole plan out there, it brings a clarity where you kind of understand that what you're missing in it. Like the leaves are my to-do list. I have to-do lists all over the place, and I still do
Mhm.
even with this tool. It's like my
Mhm, mhm.
go-to is to make a list.
Me
And a
too.
lot of times I can work it backwards too, where I'm like, well, these are really all connected to this one issue and kind
Mhm.
of work it backwards so that I know, really this is one big plan, but here's my to-do list for this part of it. And that's really the leaves of my tree. And it brings more clarity to it instead of having it just be a single little finite list. It's a
Mhm.
growing and changing, like a tree, the visual of a tree. It's a growing and changing and living
Right.
something, a project, where a
Mhm.
list is just kind of like you cross it off, and then you throw it away. It really gives me clarity, but also the ability to be flexible in what
Yeah.
I'm putting down there. So maybe I don't have to do all this today. It's still all on there,
Yeah.
but it's kind of like you said, you can pick what works well for you. And the other piece of that was the parts that my husband was helping with, he could see on there. So it was okay if if he's the planner and he wants to take care of contacting all the creditors and stuff, he can do that, which he never would, but in theory, we'll say that. That
Right.
could be his job, and maybe mine was going to be, lining up the movers, but all of it was
Mhm.
on there, and we could all see what had to be done, and
Right.
we were less likely to miss things.
Which brings me to the last part of your tree, which is the roots. And so, you just touched on one thing. I do think it's the thing that often when I make lists, I do a lot of check. I make a little square. I love to check it. I really do that. And I know the more I use the tree and I get to the root place, I remember, oh yeah, I don't have to, just because it has to get done doesn't mean I have to do
Mhm.
it. And I get better and better at being able to say, hey, here's this whole branch, or here's a leaf, or will you do that? And often when I ask my husband, he does do it. It just might be that I've taken on, I'm the one who made the list. He's not looking at the list. And so I do. So let's talk about your roots in this big move. Who are some of the people that you filled in with your roots, and how did that go?
Yeah, well, I filled in family. My family's very supportive, so we had a lot of help with like the cleaning, the packing, and that type of thing. I also filled in my contacts at my local VA to make sure that they were informed about our changes and that they could help me make the connections that we needed to make in Florida. So they were on there. The people who are going to help us, the moving company who is going to help us pack up the pod and then unpack it when we got to Florida. And the other thing was kind of making a list of people once we got to Florida who could be potential contacts. They weren't yet my roots,
Mhm.
but
Mhm.
we really needed to know like what organizations we might want to contact, like, even the VFW or military related, but also just a church that would be comfortable for us, maybe
Mhm.
the neighbors that were on either side of us, if we were
Mhm.
able to make contact with them ahead of time. And that was really helpful. So I think that's been like the biggest thing for me with the tree is to be able to really be concrete about who those roots are. I'm a
Mhm.
horrible delegator.
Yeah.
And so if I make a list, I feel like I own it and I'm responsible for it. And it
Right.
feels just kind of wrong to make somebody else a list. Like, here's your orders for the day. But when it's on a visual like that, it's just kind of like we're creating this together and it feels
Mm.
less prescribed. So it's a
Mhm.
little easier to identify the people for me
Mhm.
who can be my support and my roots when I think of it as like being partners in this project.
Right. And depending on the project, that's
Mhm.
what's right. And depending on the person, I think that the delegating often is more. Uh, it doesn't have to be handing them over a list. It could just be saying, "Hey, would you mind helping me with this?" And what I'm hearing as you were talking about your roots is almost like maybe another limb, which is connection, right? It might be
Mhm.
that we might forget to seek out connection, and then from the connection, I mean, just because it's people and
Right.
individuals doesn't mean it has to all stay on the roots. It's another act, something you have to find time for or schedule or force yourself to do if you're an introvert or homebody the way I can be. um, I can have that. If I don't write it, I can
Mhm.
forget. I do often have to say, call so and so. I have to remind myself because it's something I want to do, but I'll let weeks go by. So I just wanted to remind people to think about that. Think about adding limbs for research, for connection. There are those things that you can kind of think, oh, I have to just dive in. I have to get it done because I thought of it. But there are these in-between stages that just want to remind people to think about. Well, that's great. And I'll just stop to see if anybody has any questions for Carrie or for me at this point. I don't see questions in the Q&A box. So as you all are, and feel free to drop them in the chat if that's where you're living. But as I wait to see if any of that comes in, because we have some time, I'm going to just sort of review. We've had, I've given you the 5 steps to making a plan using the action planning tree. We've had 2 real life examples. And now I'm going to give you the sort of 4 keys to supercharge your action planning trees. And we just touched on one of them, but I'm going to do them in different order. So number 1 is, there's no one tree that works for everyone. You all probably have a move or 2 under your belt. Or have one coming up. So Carrie's move model is not necessarily going to be yours. You might have some things in common, but you all have different responsibilities, different support systems, different priorities, or do things in a different order. So just, don't feel like obvious. It's probably pretty obvious, but I really want you to remember this is a creative process. Think deeply, experience your own needs and goals, and try to find a way to stretch a little bit, ask for a little bit more help, delegate. And that brings us to the point number 2, which is all about human people. As I said before, just because it has to get done doesn't mean you have to do it. I really find that with friends and clients, this is where I spend the most time, is just really encouraging them to embrace letting people in. Sometimes you feel like you're giving somebody a list, but often what you're doing is giving them an opportunity. And I've seen more so often. And in fact, with one-to-one, we recently did this. We brought in a social media intern. She loves it. She's incredible. She's come up with a wonderful plan. And it sort of felt like we were getting somebody else to do our work for us, but she loves it and it's giving her incredible work experience. And that's a really good example of thinking about how you could delegate it. Asking for help is hard. Change is hard. Another neuroscience moment. Change registers in the same part of the brain as physical pain. So if you're resisting change, delegating, for example, I see somebody said, Melinda says, I'm a recovering non-delegator as well. Yeah, but sometimes you're just giving somebody the chance of a lifetime because it's something that's in their zone of genius. It's their place of pleasure, where it's something you're dreading or procrastinating. And I really want to encourage you all, especially those of you, you're moving, you're, inherently, if you're a spouse, you're helping somebody else all the time. If you have kids, you're helping them. Surround yourselves with loving, supportive people who will support you back, who don't need you to be perfect. And when you're thinking about the people you want to bring onto this project, your dream, your goal, your aspiration, think about the people who love your quirks, who understand your unique pressures and your unique challenges and your so-called flaws and love you for them. And, as well as your strengths, of course. And some questions I like to think about to get clearer on your roots, to kind of dig a little deeper beyond the obvious. What obstacles could get in the way of completion? What support do you want? What kind of support will really help you stay on track with the project? Sometimes friends are not going to hold your feet to the fire the way somebody else might. Obviously, coach. As a coach, I'm going to say coaches are really good at that. Support can be, as we've been talking about, can be in the form of people you delegate to. Maybe it's delegate is one of those words that makes us shift into thinking of it the wrong way, but it's, who loves doing this sort of thing? Who has expertise or enthusiasm in an area that you don't, or has more free time than you do, and is looking for something to do? Is there someone who can give you valuable feedback, really honest, valuable feedback, who, that people in your life might be kind of not as, or just, if there are people who are cheerleaders, that's great. You want those. You want people to high five you and affirm you, celebrate you. And then sometimes you want something a little bit to help push you to learn, to grow. So point number 3 is you can start anywhere on your tree. I think I said this before, but I just want to make sure you realize Some people like to start with the thing first. I've heard that a lot, or the hardest thing, meaning the thing that they're most likely to procrastinate or dread or feel kind of overwhelmed or confused by. So some people start there to get it out of the way. Some just like to knock out a bunch of easy ones, like the little happy leaves, things that don't have a big emotional impact. And so then they feel like, oh, I see part of my tree is disappearing, and that's great. There's no right way. And as you go, you're just seeing, the point is to see those leaves, to see the branches and limbs eventually disappear. And that's a thing that sort of your to-do list doesn't let you do. You can pull those things onto a to-do list, and yes, you can cross them off. But I think most of us, if we like to-do lists, we kind of live with them. There's always a to-do list. So the benefit of the tree is to see it actually, the project, come to completion. So think about where you want to start. And then one last pointer is, if one limb starts to feel overwhelming, we did talk about this earlier, so Carrie is so good at this, we got there earlier, is notice if you have a lot of detail, if it's turning into a bigger project, if it's really something that you have a ton of thoughts about, just bring it over to a whole new tree. Just use that model, take your limb, start a tree, and use that to kind of clear the space, have a clean space to work with. Okay, so if anybody has questions, we are here standing by for questions. I'm going to check the.
So, Katie, we did have a question from Stacy Baton. She did ask, she doesn't have any issues delegating, but as a creative thinker who does drive projects, and she does drive a lot of the projects within our organization, she wants to know what she can do to better assist the people she delegates tasks to, so that they take ownership and run with those tasks and runs with what she needs them to do.
Yes, I hear you, Stacy. I've been there. I how many times have I heard people say, it takes more time to delegate, to oversee them, than to just do it myself, right? That's usually the feeling, is like, I don't want to do all that oversight. If I've handed it off, I want it done. And some people just get stuck. They don't approach it the same exact way you would. When it comes to this, a couple things I like to do in the beginning is to ask people, do you need anything from me? What could get in the way? Are you feeling like, to ask a bunch of questions from the beginning, so they really know that you're there to support them, and you can say it until the cows come home, but to really kind of tee it up, say, should we check in every week? Should we, knowing you will only know for yourself, Stacy, what the right mode for you is, but this is where I go. So you can kind of customize this for yourself. But I tend to kind of check in with people and say, okay, I do the same thing. Do you want to they don't have to make a tree with you, but you could say, hey, what are all the pieces of this? Are you clear? Are there any questions right now before they leave? Because I have found that no matter how many times you say you can always come to me with questions, people often sit on them and they get stuck, and they don't really know how to, especially if they're more junior, they kind of don't always know about that problem solving piece of it. So I kind of try to tee them up from the beginning. I don't know if that answers your question, but that tends to be how I approach it. And I probably, if I think about it further, will have some other ideas. But that is generally from the beginning. I ask them, what do you want to get out of this? How can I support you? What could get in the way? Are you unclear about anything? Because your understanding of something is probably much more deep and nuanced than when you hand it off. So I kind of just try to stress test it from the beginning. I don't know if that helps. Are there any questions? Okay, I see Stacy's responded. So I see that, Stacy. I see what you said, that you do have weekly check-ins already. Yeah, I tend to ask, when you say pointed questions, the other thing, a coach approach, is to ask really open-ended questions. So not to give them yes or no, like, do you understand this? Just say, without knowing the exact situations you're in, I would say try to think of open-ended questions that don't have a yes or no answer, that kind of force them to speak at greater length, or for you to say, and if they don't, then just say, can you tell me more? Can you tell me more? Not that you're checking in on them, not that you're monitoring them, that you're just saying, how's it going? Tell me how that's going. Tell me how I can help you. Is that, maybe that's, I'm probably rambling, but I think that's how I would approach it. And I find it's usually, I had somebody who worked for me in my last job, who I would delegate to, and then I'm probably thinking of her as I'm talking through this with you, really ended up just eventually coming to me with a problem and not really the solution. And so I then started to say, hey, why don't you, when you get to a place where you're feeling stuck, do some research on 3 potential solutions, and then let's talk through them together. So then she would start to see how I process things and how we arrived at decisions together, or solutions together. So it might be saying, hey, if you come to a place where you're stuck, generate 3 ideas. Let's talk about it. And so it's not so much that you're checking in on how's, doing that. I've had a boss who was like, I felt like he was just monitoring me rather than trying to help me. And I think there is an important nuance to how you ask that, but hopefully that helps. Okay, so, as we're kind of coming close to the end of the hour, I just want to make sure everybody has what they need from the tree. The mission of this Power Hour, and I can go in deeper. I see Stacy, you're responding. I'm going to read in a second. But the mission of this Power Hour was to provide you with one bite-sized tool that will help you get into action on any idea, desire, aspiration, you got it, goal, so that you can create your own purposeful, energized reality. And I just want to check in to see if I gave everyone exactly what you need to use this tool, knowing that you're going to get the handout sent to you. And to get started on that project, whatever the projects are that you shared with us in the chat or that you have in mind, if you can just drop it, either a yes, a big fat yes in the chat box, or a no. And if no, then just let us know what your question is. If you're kind of stuck using this tool or you have a question around it, let me know. And as you're doing that, I'll just review to say, begin by deciding what that goal is and get really clear on it. I like to say envision it completed. And it can be for your professional or your personal life, and stated in the positive. One of the most important things you can do, I think, is to get out of your head before it takes up too much real estate. If it's just something that's been spinning, I like to think thought is for confusion. Clarity comes from action. So, and what I will say, and I've using this tool, even by being here, you've taken action. By using the tool, you've taken action. You can continue to just take small little actions and work towards that, and try different things. You're just experimenting. There's no one right way to do it. Just start and think of it like sailing. Once you shove off the shore, you tack. You're not just going from one place to the next in a straight line. You're gonna move with the wind, move with the tides. And so just think of it like you're just getting into action, and then you're learning, and you're adjusting. So with that in mind, if you're wondering what your next steps are, I'm going to get you into action. And Melinda, if you'll bring up the last slide, I get a little bit of, I have a request, I guess, that I'm going to make of you. So when you log off this webinar, either right away take 2 minutes or schedule 2 minutes that you can take in the next 24 hours. And I believe every single one of you, there we are, can do this. So to take just 2 minutes, as I said, take 2 and call me in the morning, but you can also call Ruth. That might be better. You already got your trunk straight, I think. You've already identified that. So now you're going to be in steps 2, 3, 4, 5. So walk through the next steps. Just take 30 seconds for each. That'll add up to 2 minutes. So ask yourself, what are the 3 to 5 key action areas? What are the main elements of each action? Then get specific. What are the finite tasks or the to-do items for each of those that you'll need to do to see it completed? And who might you call on to help you, to support you? Or who might you delegate to? And Stacy, to your point, you might even make your trunk get comfortable delegating, or delegate my team with pleasure. And maybe that's you could try making a tree from that. My answers are what I have seen have worked for me. I think for everybody, like I said, everybody's tree is different. Everybody's approach to solving their problems or overcoming challenges or fulfilling a dream, it's going to be different. But just take 2 minutes, if you will, right after this or in the next 24 hours. And then the last thing I'm going to add to that is take one leaf off or a branch or a limb. I mean, whatever you can do, but what can you do in the next 24 hours to start taking a little? So the action is those 30 seconds, 30 seconds, 30 seconds, 30 seconds. And the next action is doing something on that tree, taking down, writing a Post-it and taking it down. And, you know, just to see what it feels like to move forward on this project of yours. Of course, you can do more than one, but at least do one. And then I encourage you to track your success, track as you go, feel them. I always tell people to smile with their mouth because I feel like they are sort of doing the things and that feels sort of pleasurable, but they're not letting their body know. So, you know, no matter how big or small the accomplishment is, take a moment to high five yourself. And, you know, the one thing I want you to come away with from today is feeling about how you're going to create something that is exciting and won't just sit on the shelf. So that's why I want you to take that one small action at least. And I think that's it for me. I'm not sure if there are more questions. I'm happy to take more questions if anybody has them. Are there any other questions? I guess not. So I think I'm just going to thank you all for being here with us today. And thank you so much, Melinda and Stacy, for having us.
Thanks for joining us today, Katie. That was wonderful. A couple things. I love what you said. Clarity comes from action. And I think that's really neat. And it goes along with actually Stacy Baton, who's one of our guests here today. She'll always tell people, for as far as employment goes, you know, just do one thing, just do one thing. And that's kind of along that same line, that action will give you some clarity and help you move forward. So I wrote that down. I'm like, oh, clarity comes from, I love that. I thought that was really great. And I'm a big to-do list person. So I'm like, oh, I can just see me plucking leaves right off of that.
Yeah.
And the one thing, and this was just my thought, because I think we all tend to have a hard time delegating, is depending on what the project is, it could be as simple as I'm having a dinner party, right? And people come over. I don't want anyone in my kitchen. People want to help. So ahead of time, what I do is I try to think of the things that I'm willing to allow them to do for me.
Yeah.
And then I'm ready to let go and let someone help me with it. But it's funny because it's almost like I have to prepare myself to delegate and allow whatever that outcome. If the cheese tray doesn't look like I want it, it's okay, you know. But it's funny how we have to, especially as women, that allow ourselves to do that. But I have to prepare myself to do that. So I'm just sitting there going, delegate, share the experience. That was the thing that I wrote down, like through delegating, we're kind of sharing that experience with people depending on what your tree is. But
absolutely.
This was fabulous. I'm just scribbling. I know you're going to do the handouts, which is great, but I'm writing down my little notes and drawing my little tree. So thank you so much. I mean, simple tips like that, they're simple, but there's so much strength in that simplicity. And I really appreciate that. So thank you for joining us today. I'm thinking I'm going to grab a quick picture of all of us here too. So do a quick smile for me. I keep forgetting to get pictures. I just want to thank everybody. I don't know if you have anything you want to add, Melinda, before we wrap it up for today.
Just a quick reminder for those that are live on here today. Thank you for being with us live today, and remind your friends and those that were not able to be live with us today that this was recorded, and we will be putting the recording on our Facebook page so that they can watch it after the fact. And we will have the tool available if people would like to request the tool. If they would just drop us a note on our Facebook page, we will email the tool to them after the fact if they would like it. And if they have any questions, they can contact one-to-one through our Facebook page, and we are more than happy to put them in contact with one-to-one and Katie through one-to-one through our Facebook page. So please let us know if you would like more information about this amazing organization and the service that they provide for our caregivers, military spouses, this coaching and this mentoring service that they provide. Thank you, ladies, for being with us today. We really appreciate your time today. And those that were online with us today, thank you for your time this afternoon. I personally am racking up the list of things that I need to apply this tool to, especially for the next year, all of the projects that I've got going on, getting ready for retirement and things like that we've got going on. So thank you for being with us today, and we really appreciate your time. So I am going to turn off the recording, and thank you again. And we wish you the best for the rest of the week. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye, everybody.